Okay, alright, I'm going to attempt to explain the infinite sphere, what I call the infinite sphere, and one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and most of all, important three-dimensional space, and how we can see it as in a non-Euclidean way, so we can see it in a way that doesn't require axes, like it only requires movement, so we can see things in terms of the expression of movement instead of just general direction in a Euclidean space. So okay, I'm going to start off, I'm going to explain the first point, that Euclidean space can only exist without a reference of 90 degrees or straight lines. So if we were in a infinitely dark space or space, and we were to imagine making a shape, we could not just make a shape. The only shape we could make would be, well, first would be a movement. It would be an expression and a movement, two expressions of movement, and one would be, the first one would be infinite expansion in all directions. So that's the first dimension. So that would look like this, in two-dimensional, obviously on a piece of paper, so it's going to be two-dimensional. That would look like that, just to give you an idea. And then put one there, and then we would have the second dimension, which is another, which is another expression of movement, which is infinitely shrinking in all directions. And I say all directions because we don't have a reference of direction yet. We're in 3D space. Okay, we're kind of in a 3D space, but we haven't created a physical 3D space yet. So we only have movement, two expressions of movement. Okay, because there is no way to tell what direction or angles or anything yet, or lengths, we say infinite in all directions, so that would be represented by the infinity sign. It just basically means that there's no reference for distance. That's what that means. There's no reference points, there's nothing. And then we can use this shape, which is a circle, but it represents the sphere, and that represents non-Euclidean geometry, which means there's no axis, there's no axis or anything. Because how can we just have an axis if we don't have a space to create the axis in yet? So we are creating space to have the axis in first, if you understand what I mean by that. And then, of course, we have inward and outward, which would be represented by plus, which is expansion, and minus, which is subtraction or shrinking. Okay, so now we've got those four symbols, I can explain my mathematical expressions, which are this and this, which basically means infinitely expanding in all directions, and infinitely shrinking in all directions. Or we can call this centrifugal, if I can spell it right, force, and centripetal force. So the next step in this sequence of events, conceptual events, we would create the third dimension of stillness, which is corporeal reality. Well, okay, I don't want to say corporeal reality yet, but let's just say that we have a reference. We have some kind of reference of shape created in this dimension, which would be a sphere, and I'll explain that now. So with these two movements, if we combine both of them, what we get is a sphere. And why? Because if we have inward force, centripetal force, and we have centrifugal force, right, in all directions infinitely, outwardly and inwardly, we get a sphere, because it's, yeah, that's what's created. Yeah, but so this sphere, which obviously is a circle here, is what I call the infinite sphere, because it's infinite, because we still don't have a reference point of distance or anything like that. We only have a reference of shape. And the mathematical expression for the infinite sphere would be, I've created this, and it is this. So this is the infinite sphere. And this is the third dimension. Right? So this is the first dimension, this is the second dimension, and this is the third dimension, aka 3D space. So we've created 3D space as a shape, as some kind of, this is obviously all conceptual, and we are visualizing this, and this is the purpose of this kind of like thought experiment, is to be able to visualize a new way of imagining the third dimension, instead of imagining like x, y, z axis like this, you know, which how do we get that? How can we get x, y, and z without a reference? It's just impossible. So the way of looking at Euclidean geometry, because this is a Euclidean geometry, right? This whole idea of straight lines and 90-degree angles. Okay, so we can't just get that from nowhere. So we must start somewhere. So this is why I believe that this is what the actual dimensions are. Dimensions are movements. Firstly, the first two are movements before they become an actual stillness. And stillness is obviously it's not really actually still, because there's two directions of force happening. So okay, just a note to add. I'm halfway through speaking about this. I just want to say that to get the infinite sphere in stillness, because this is obviously stillness, we need equal force that way, and that way equal energy. So these two mathematical expressions, infinite expansion in all directions, infinite subtraction or shrinking in all directions, they would have to be equal. So that would be represented like this. Let me just draw. I'm just going to say plus. And then we could add, say, just get a number, 1 joule. 1 joule of energy, which is just a random measurement of energy, but okay, we're just going to say 1 joule, and that would equal infinite sphere stillness, you know, infinite stillness, whatever it is, you know. So this number can be 1 billion, that could be 1 billion, it doesn't matter, it's just for the mathematical equation, which is really shit right now, I'm sorry, but this is rough, and yeah, it would have to be equal to equal the infinite sphere. Okay, so in conclusion, I'll just finish this off. So the reason I have spoken about this is because obviously this is the very basics of the fundamental of movement, and to understand the toroidal and hyperbolic geometries, which this is the basics to understand that. And the first dimensions of space, ultimately, so space, counter space, and yeah, these two movements and this stillness is what helps us to create the first object, almost. We can call it an object. It's not actually physical yet, but yeah. And then we can make another one of these objects, and then we go into the whole sacred geometry, the 6 days of creation thing, if you know what that is. If not, I'll explain it, or send a link to a video of what that explains. But once we have one, we can then create another one, and then we can have a reference upon a reference, and then we can ultimately create degrees, with the whole flower of life thing, seed of life, whatever you want to call it. But this is the first steps. Often people, when explaining this, don't explain how we even get a sphere. And this is basically my explanation of why the sphere, why the infinite sphere. Okay, so that's all of my points now. We're done.